Welcome to this edition of the Eric Miscoll Show. I'm Eric Miscoll with EMS Now, joined by my co-host, as always, the lovely and attractive Philip Stoten, logging in from down under. Welcome and for joining us today for our material supply chain update. We do this periodically, and we're fortunate to have back two guests who've been with us before. Dale Ford, the Chief Analyst with the ECIA, and Jeff Ray, the Senior Vice President of Global Strategic Accounts with TTI. Before we get into our back and forth here, let me just handle some housekeeping issues very quickly. Any attendees will be muted and remain as such throughout the course of this. But if you wish to pose a question to the panel, please do so using the question tab that should appear at the bottom of the screen. And as always, this is being recorded and will be rebroadcast on EMS Now probably next week. So tell your friends and family and share it with all. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Always look forward to this. There's kind of a lot happening in your world. So before we get into all that, I do want to at least tip a hat to, I know you both attended the ECIA's executive conference this week. I think you had about 400 or 500 distributor kind of supply chain people there all together in one room. So Jeff, I'm assuming you guys got it all figured out and it's smooth sailing from here, right?
Yeah, we're just going to give you the conclusion today. Yes.
But
what was the big debate there? What was the big discussion around the coffee breaks? What's stressing everybody at that event? Or was there no stress? It was just relaxation and happy times.
Well, certainly, probably the most prevalent conversations of what 2024 going to mean from a growth perspective. You know, many companies are going into to forecasting budgetary process. So, you know, probably the number one topic was, what does 2024 look like? And certainly a fair amount of challenges that are present were discussed. And Dale and I will flesh some of those out as we go through on the supply chain. Yeah.
You know, and Dale, you presented a lot of data at the conference, and I was fortunate to see some of those slides. So why don't you begin by giving us kind of the highlights of kind of how you assess the electronic component industry currently?
Well, there's two dimensions to address. One is how the market is behaving, and the second is how we're dealing with the inventories in the channel. Those are two very important aspects that everybody is trying to manage through right now. Definitely everybody understands that we still have excess inventory at different stages in the channel. And so there's discussions on, again, what do we learn from this time and how does that change what we might do next time? But in the near term, everybody's working to address the inventory issues, work that through the channel so that we can begin responding directly to the direction of the actual market. So that's one key issue. And the other key issue, of course, is the market. As we look at the statistics, two things that we can look at. One is if we look at the WSTS data for semiconductor shipments, there's encouraging trends there where the quarter-over-quarter growth patterns have turned up. We're still declining, but we've come off the bottom, I guess you could say, in terms of the growth rate and the negative growth rate. So the data would appear that we'll break positive by the end of the year in terms of quarter-over-quarter growth. If we look at our ECST survey that we conduct every month and every quarter at ECIA, what we see is the index there, we're fighting to get into positive territory. Above 100 would indicate a sentiment that we're experiencing growth, month-to-month growth. We haven't really made it yet. As I mentioned in the conference, hope springs eternal. So as people look forward to the next month, they keep saying, gosh, things are going to get a lot better than what they are now. But then when they report the actual results for the month, it's like, well, we're kind of where we were last month. So the industry is struggling and remaining hopeful that it can start, seeing some kind of growth, but we're not quite there yet. So the hopeful way I put it is, hopefully we're setting the stage so that as we move into 2024, we can start to achieve some growth, but it won't happen this year.
Way too much use of the word hopeful in that answer, Dale. That's a bit of a concern. But where we are now in terms of having maybe bounced through the bottom of that demand cycle, how much of a decline was that actually in there? And you were coming off a big high in 22 in terms of numbers.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So if we look at in terms of the actual demand, you can look at it both in terms of how things behaved worldwide, and then we look at how they behaved in the Americas. So worldwide, first half of 23 over the first half of 22, which I think reflects where we're going to be at the bottom. At that point, if we look at the passives categories, we're down nearly 18%. Within semiconductors as well, we're down a little over 18%. So, that's the worldwide picture. Now, the good news is in the Americas, we've done relatively better, but still it's a tough situation. Semiconductors were down, about 15.5% in the first half over first half. But again, the passives down 17%. So, it's a tough double-digit drop that we've experienced. Everybody says, well, gosh, are we going to achieve a soft landing or a hard landing? Nobody defines what those are, but I think those numbers kind of say we've had a hard landing. And so the hope is again, that word hope, that we're rebounding off that, but it was a double-digit tough decline that we've gone through in this first half.
Jeff, how are you seeing it?
Well, thank you. Well, I'll go back to Philip's position. I think there may be a thin line between being optimistic and naive. And so while we're hopeful that things will improve, to be honest, I think that we have a little bit more headwind as what's going on in the supply chain. If you look at the supply chain itself and how do companies react to fluctuations in demand, I would first start with, I think the demand has actually maintained fairly well in 2023 as opposed to 2022. I think the biggest driver over the last 24 months, if not 36 months, is actually not demand, but forecasted demand. And so the forecasted demand is actually what I believe has driven a lot of the disruptions in the overall supply chain. So I'm going to categorize that one maybe not as a visible disruptor, but a little bit more as a hidden disruptor, because we see the forecasts that come to us from our customers. The manufacturers see the forecast, but they see these from multiple points. And when you get multiple points forecasting the same end customer demand, you can get these spikes that what I would call, not true demand, but forecasted demand. And I think that's where we got off center quite a bit. And so I think what has happened, and Dale has highlighted the amount of inventory that's in a channel, and a concern that I have is as these dependencies on whether it's the EMS has inventory, the distributor has inventory, in customer OEMs, even the component manufacturers have inventory, you get this current state that inventory is a safe place. And I think as lead times come down, it becomes more and more of a safe place, because you think that the market, when it does tick back up, and it will, that you can quickly pivot to smooth running manufacturing facilities. And I think that there's really some challenges with that, because momentum it takes a long time to shift momentum. It doesn't move quickly. It's a big battleship to turn around. And as aforementioned, all these entities, again, OEMs, component manufacturers, distributors, we're all trying to jettison out inventory and from our own hand, but a sudden change in end customer demand will put a stress on the supply chain. And these products that maybe let's just say they're 16 weeks today because of the available inventory that's in the channel. Maybe the manufacturers don't want to reduce the lead times any further than that. But as we're tracking our suppliers based upon their committed time, which is a large part of accuracy of lead time, they're still only tracking at 81% on-time delivery to their stated original commit date. Pre-COVID, those numbers were in the 90s. And so it tells me that they really still don't. And oh, by the way, we don't ding them for delivering early. So those are only lates. So it tells me that the lead time, which is, supply chain is a lot more than just lead time, but it is a very large component in that calculation. I think we have some challenges with the accuracy of that data. And the other challenge that I think that we're going to have is in large part, the lead times that are reducing the most are pretty much in commoditized standard product. But when you look at the upticks or the strengths in the market, it's going to be in commercial air, military, aerospace applications. Unfortunately, that business is very, very strong. Certainly in healthcare, we're still seeing some strengths in our transportation business, in some sub verticals inside of industrial. Those products typically aren't your most commoditized products. They are a little bit more non-standard. In some cases, they're customer specific. And again, my position is, while the standard product lead times may be producing, it's not the case for all products. And as those vertical markets start to expand, I believe that you'll see the lead times go from what they are today to something more pronounced very, very quickly. And the question is, are the manufacturers, are they capable of responding? Do they have the capacity themselves? In some cases, we've seen layoffs at manufacturers. Will they be able to get personnel back, get the inspectors and operators trained, in many cases at the 3 to 6 month period of time to get those? So I guess my position is the end customer demand for non-standard items is growing faster than capacity could expand, which will cause a problem. So
there's a lot to unpack
downer on it, but I still have a lot of concerns over the supply chain for those reasons.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, Jeff. And when going back to that kind of the first part you were talking about, which is the visibility in the supply chain, the predictability of the forecasts people are giving you. We've been in a situation where there were shortages in the supply chain. EMS companies have gone back to their OEMs continuously and talked about those shortages and what that's meant with allocation of manufacturing capacity. They've then encouraged those OEMs to perhaps give them a much longer term forecast. And the longer term the forecast is, probably the less accurate it becomes. Because stuff's on allocation or because stuff's on long lead time, they felt they've needed to place orders, even if the terms of those orders haven't been exactly as they would have liked. So now you get in this position where you have this inventory overhang, and you have this shift in the market, which doesn't align properly with the forecast they've been, that have come down the supply chain to you. It seems that visibility is and continues to be the main problem. There isn't this glass pipeline that allows everybody to see when they can get stuff. So they've kind of swung from just in time to just in case. There's perhaps some over ordering going on. is there any way that can be improved, or do we just have to wait for that to shake its way through the supply chain?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll jump on that one first, and Dale, please jump in. I think you're right. It went from so let's peel it back a little bit. The interest rates today are significantly different than they were 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And so as we went into the last rush, if you will, credit wasn't an issue. Inflation wasn't an issue. And so a difference that I'm observing today is that we're going into this less broad, but still equally upside optimistic market, particularly in some verticals, without the ability to to extend forecast and orders at the same rate. So a lot of these are not planned today. As you've said before on the forecast, there have to be more mindful of what the commitments are made by the end customer. So my position again is oftentimes these pipelines are being held very close to the vest. They're not planned. Let's also keep in mind that every customer that, at least that I engage with, has a committed stance to reduce their vendor base because of the broker market that's experienced over the last few years. They want to move away from that. Well, their history is not in our history, and it's not in our planned capacity or orders. And when we're not receiving forecasted demand from our customers or hard orders, again, I'm going to go back and suspect that part of it's due to the inventory that they're carrying today that is significantly higher than it was 2 and 3 years ago. The credit situation, the interest rates, inflation, these are all things that are keeping, I believe, the end customers are a little bit less optimistic, to go back to that, on committing to these longer term supply chain programs.
Yeah, this dynamic between customers and suppliers up and down the supply chain, it continues to evolve. And, we've gone through, I won't go through to try and describe all of them, but, we've gone through periods where we went through NCNR agreements that started to be put in place or exercised, which created some difficulties in some relationships that people have had. And so, I'd say we're in a process also where we're somewhat reestablishing some of the trust amongst partners in the supply chain. And so we have to work through those issues as well. And so when we get forecasts, we kind of have to handicap those forecasts, I guess you could say, in terms of just how much we're willing to bank on those forecasts, because one way or another, we're going to be held accountable for what we do with those forecasts. And so the other thing that I think that Jeff made a very important point in differentiating between the commoditized parts and the more customized parts. A big part of what we're doing is we're rebalancing the supply chain, and those customized parts, quite often we're looking at components that are adopting the latest and greatest technologies. And that's not just true of the advanced, process geometries in logic and memory components. It's also true in the technologies that we're adopting in the analog and discrete area and the packaging areas. All of these areas continue, the technologies didn't stand still. And so, as we work to ramp to volume production with new technologies, that's always been a challenge. You go through the process of qualifying something and getting the yields where they need to be. So new products based on new technologies will always have somewhat of a challenge in meeting the near-term demands. And so I think that the point that Jeff made there is a very important point to understand, that you can't lump everything together. You have to differentiate between commodity and custom and advanced types of product solutions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, it strikes me, and in having looked at some of your slides, Dale, that this isn't the first cycle like this that the industry has been through. And, some of your slides kind of covered that and compared the previous downturns and the length of them and what have you. But, so I'd ask you to kind of reflect on that, to kind of, hopefully draw some insight from the past to maybe judge this one. And Jeff, to that point, your mention of the interest rates, I think is spot on there, right? What's different this time around is that money seemingly is much more expensive, although I mean the low interest rates that we've enjoyed for the last 5 years or whatever it's been certainly weren't there 10 years ago either, right? So but I mean, so how would you compare the current downturn to previous ones? Is it just you're both kind of seasoned in the industry in this way that you have the benefit of kind of hindsight, right? So I mean, how would you judge this one compared to others that you've experienced?
Well, the interesting thing in terms of these cycles is they're very similar in terms of their length. They may go higher or lower, but the interesting thing is the median point for these 11 cycles that we've gone through is 24 months. I'm sorry, 48 months. And we are now approaching the 48-month mark. And all indicators are that annual cycle is going to start turning up, be less negative, I guess is the best way to put it. And so these cycles last roughly 48 months. And so there's some real alignment with historical patterns there that we see continuing. The amplitude on these cycles varies greatly. This cycle was not, a couple of cycles before this, we had extremely steep slopes where we raced to the peak, on a tall peak, and then we collapsed on the other side. This cycle has been somewhat more stable in its nature in spite of the pandemic. We reached a healthy double-digit peak in terms of growth, and distributors kind of had historical results where we had 2 years back-to-back of high double-digit growth. And so for distributors, the period, that we went through in 2020, 2021, 2022, that was a period of extraordinary growth for distribution. And so, the dynamics that you go through when you have higher amplitudes in these cycles, there's a bit of a ringing effect that you might have, I guess, to borrow a technical term, that comes out of these. It's not necessarily a damped cycle. So the other thing that I think is important, we talk interest rates, but another important point that I made during my presentation, that that NAM, the National Association of Manufacturers, they're an advocacy group, and they have been really highlighting a critical issue that the tax code was changed so that you could only, get deductions based on EBIT instead of EBITDA. And removing that depreciation amortization element really took imposed a big hit in terms of the tax burden. And like 77% of that increased tax burden is borne by manufacturers. And they're encouraging, more than encouraging, almost demanding that the Congress change that. Otherwise, we're going to get into trouble with the willingness of companies to make the capital investments that are needed. And so it's not just what the bank is charging, it's what the government is taking. So manufacturers are facing both of those issues.
Hey, Jeff, what are your thoughts on the cycle? And the other element, you've spoken about this a bit here today, is the product development, right, within these different sectors. And in some ways that's become more rapid. It seems to me like, we're developing a hell of a lot more products a lot quicker these days than we were 10, 20 years ago as well. So
Well, I think that there is certainly an increased level of end customer new products. And as a byproduct, the component manufacturers are also introducing new products to meet the enhanced performance characteristic requirements of those applications. I think going back to the differences between commercial and consumer products and applications versus maybe an EV charging station, so if the overall tablet market is down and there's a MOSFET that's in that tablet, you can be duped into thinking, well, there's available MOSFETs, clearly because the tablet and PC market's down. Well, I'm pretty sure that's not the same MOSFET that goes into an EV charging station. So when you get into those levels and details, I think that's a little bit about what Dale and I are speaking about. While in general, there are some improvements, particularly in some of the commoditized product categories that largely go into handheld, ultra portable, consumer types of applications. Those are pretty much flat to down today. Where we're seeing growth is in more the harsh environment, ruggedized industrial, military, aerospace type of applications. And again, with transportation on the mobility side, from EV charging stations all the way into electrification of drivetrains. Now, again, there are some issues right now with some automotive strikes, but in large part, the overall infrastructure builds and the mobility market, while impacted, is not severely impacted by the near-term news that's going on with the U.S. automakers. And so when I go back to the trends are for end customers to move away from discrete orders and move back into forecasted demand. And so they're trying to move products onto supply chain programs. And Dale, I have to disagree with you. As a distributor, and I'll speak for all distributors, we don't get to pick and choose which forecast we believe. So we have to take them all at their merit. The only time that no action is taken is when you have available to sell inventory that is equal to or greater than the forecasted demand inside lead time. And that's when I go back to the accuracy of the lead time, the accuracy of the forecast. And while today there's likely no action that is being taken by a distributor because they have the inventory already, so they don't need to place an order on the component manufacturer. But what happens when that available inventory is consumed? And that's when I believe you're going to experience the 16 to 22 to 28 to 40 week escalation on lead time that can happen very, very rapidly. And it's going to happen, going back to Dale's point, it's going to happen with manufacturing facilities that will need that CapEx expenditure that is not happening today. And my concern, again, is will new orders drive extended lead times? And I believe that they will. And how will we be able to pivot into those situations? So Dale also talked about interest rates and what's going on with the North American manufacturing. And so without question, the North American manufacturing is, let's just say that it's flat at best. It's being challenged. And with interest rates, the good news is that the dollar is stronger. The bad news is that it impacts your ability to export. And if your goods now are not as viable in the European market or in the China market as a result of a stronger dollar, I think that's going to also come back and have some impact that we need to anticipate in the 2024 budgeting cycle, which again, going back to Philip's question, that's what people were talking about, is how do you plan staff monitor control for 2024. I think those are some important points to consider as well.
So in short, we don't have anything like a glass pipeline. If we do, it's very foggy, it's very misty. And to Dale's point, and to an extent to your point, Jeff, we're in a cycle where the spikes are much larger. So, with those large increases come large decreases. Is that because we're in a more disruptive situation, or is that just because things just move much more quickly now than they ever did in the past. And the other question I just wanted to come on to after that is, are we just lacking the tools to have the supply chain visibility we need? Start with why all the spikes are so big.
I don't see it's necessarily lacking the tools. I'd come to one other item that I'd mention, I guess, as well. And it's not necessarily foggy. I mean, in the Americas region, the largest share of what we do in terms of electronics manufacturing and in terms of what distributors serve is the industrial markets, followed by military aerospace markets, followed by the automotive market. Now, the old saying, which is still very true, is the industrial market is the market of 1,000 markets. And so you're not forecasting a market. You have many markets. Now, to some, in the aggregate sense, as you roll that up, you get that benefit of a diversified market, you know, where one market's down, the other one's up. You get that safety there. But on the other hand, you're responding to 1,000 different demands for 1,000 different types of products quite often. And so this adds to the challenge that I think that Jeff was describing. Now, as far as not having adequate tools, you know, the industry has adopted many valuable tools in how they manage the supply chain and how they communicate up and down the supply chain. There's a lot of machine learning, AI types of technologies that have been adopted, improved communications techniques that have been adopted going up and down the supply chain. So I think the industry's done an outstanding job in terms of the tools that it's adopted. But, you know, being an analyst, you know, the one thing we say as an analyst is when you put out a forecast, you automatically know what's wrong. You're always going to be in an environment where you're going to have to make your best forecast and plan to that. But you also know that to one degree or another, that forecast will be wrong.
Well, let me jump in on that. I think without question, our tools are better than they've been, but I don't think that they are what we need. Anytime you have, you know, the calculations that the companies run to predictive so the predictive analysis is still heavily predicated on lead time, which is a historical measurement. And so when you look at advanced forecasting, not just advanced in technology, but advanced from a market perspective, I think that we still have room to go and ground to gain in the development of our tools for better analytics. As we mentioned before, some of the challenges that we've had over the last few years is when multiple sources are receiving forecasts for the same demand. And of course, by the time the manufacturer gets that forecast, it's 300% or 400% or 200%, whatever the scenario is. That's not real demand. That's just a little bit of gamesmanship, a little bit of challenges. I don't want to steer too far into Israel and the conflict there right now, but I would like to use it as a point. We have a couple of manufacturing facilities that we're engaged with that are in that region. Certainly right now, it is contained to a specific area. If it were to grow in region and scope to a larger area, I think you could have some very significant impacts to oil, component manufacturing that requires the components, as well as the shipping and other challenges that come through there. But if you look back at the scenario that's happened for components that are made in that region, they've extended out significantly over the last 4 weeks. There's no new demand for those products, but there's a heightened hysteria that you will not be able to get those products. So people are increasing the orders, which is extending the lead time. And that's just a micro example. And the reason I'm using it is that there's no other driver of the demand of the products that come from those facilities over risk, concerns, and things of that nature, all driven by the conflict in Israel.
Interesting.
It plays into that point of geopolitics generally, though, doesn't it? And that's starting to, that's definitely having an active role in where people manufacture, where people assemble. It's shifting demand, and it's people are responding to disruptions quickly, because when they haven't in the past, they've had challenges because of that. So you again, those it's that just in time, just in case balance that people are struggling to figure out at the moment.
But Philip, where we went from just in time to just in case to just too much is because we didn't have that proper filter on our analytics to be able to do it. And that's why I'm going back and saying we're very much improved over where we have been, but we're not where we need to be. And I would suggest that further improvements in the ability to have more accurate forecasting tools for true demand, as opposed to this
Phantom
process
demand
that we're using today that has some challenges.
Yeah.
And
do you have a role in producing those tools?
One of the key areas of emphasis that came in at our conference was artificial intelligence. Now, it was interesting to me that there was that emphasis. When I was doing an interview for my top 50 authorized distributors, I interviewed a number of, the top executives from the top distributors and I asked them specifically about the adoption of artificial intelligence. And coming out of those interviews, I didn't identify a particular focus on the area of artificial intelligence and applying it to the management of our businesses. Now, some people were doing some things, there were a range of answers. One person was like, I should say, more cynical, I guess you could say, in terms of their perspective on artificial intelligence. But there were many presentations at our conference that addressed artificial intelligence. Some of them were more on the marketing side of things and how it would be used that way. But if you're trying to improve and sharpen your tools in terms of forecasting and preparing properly for demand, definitely as we go down the path, there is a lot taking place beyond just generative, AI, with artificial intelligence that could be a valuable tool in helping us as another tool to help us solve this.
Yeah, I think most distributors use some type of data science and feed it into machine learning applications in AI today, whether they call it that or not. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I've never been of the opinion that it's the lack of tools. It seems like it's a lack of willingness, and there's still business competitiveness among these various players in the market that kind of muddy the waters, so to speak, and may not allow for this perfect glass pipeline that achieves perfect visibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're likely right.
Yeah, I wanted to go off on something you touched on Israel and that and kind of where manufacturing and the shifts. Reshoring clearly has been an issue, right? As we've talked about that, and supply chain, resiliency, all the words that are thrown out. But how do you see that impacting the industry, and is that impacting the manufacturers at all? Because you can move the manufacturing to an EMS and a different thing, but all of the manufacturing was still an Asia-based kind of an activity. Do you see any of that changing?
Yes, absolutely. And so we've seen a significant amount of either expansion of facilities in Mexico or building new facilities in Mexico. And of course, when you're going to production in 2023 in the interior, those plans started 4 or 5 years ago. That's not something that started in Q1 of 2023. And so there's a pronounced movement from the component manufacturers themselves. When you look at the EMS segment, and mainly due to China, +1, whether it's going into in Thailand, for example, into Vietnam, into India, some into Penang, but candidly, there was a lot of facilities already at capacity in Penang, and the employment opportunities and cost are a little bit higher in Penang than they would be in Thailand, Vietnam, or India. We're also seeing, quite a bit of, again, movement into Mexico, and then we're seeing movement going into Tunisia in North Africa. We're seeing movement going into Romania, into Poland. And so for various reasons, we are seeing reshoring. What specifically is happening here is really moving into Mexico, but not only from a manufacturing standpoint, EMS manufacturing standpoint, but also a component manufacturing perspective as well.
That's interesting.
So there's the reshoring, and then
go ahead, Dale.
What Jeff's describing would be a little broader in terms of what's called friendshoring, of course, where your base addresses more of the geopolitical realities that we're dealing with these days. But there's the intent and desire to adjust manufacturing locations, but that's just the first level. As we all know, if you're going to place production in a certain area, you have to have the supporting infrastructure. And if you're in something like semiconductors, that's vast and extensive. But no matter what you're talking about, there has to be supporting infrastructure, there has to be supporting transportation, and as we're well learning now, there has to be a supporting labor force that has varying levels of skill. And so all of those areas have to be addressed as companies work to adjust their global profile of manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. The point I was going to make was that listening to Jeff, when you talk about those locations of reshoring, what you're seeing is reshoring generally into regions, but the low-cost elements of those regions, like Eastern Europe, like Mexico and Central America and places like that, which I think is really interesting. The talent issue is huge, and I'm not quite sure how people are dealing with that. Some regions have a much better talent pipeline and talent output than others in terms of graduates being trained. But clearly, when you look at what people are trying to do in the US with semiconductor facilities, getting talent to those is a big problem, and it's a barrier. I wonder if automation is part of the solution. I'm convinced it's not all of the solution, but it's certainly something the EMS industry is looking hard at as a way to mitigate some of the talent shortages. But that everybody I speak to in the EMS industry tells me that regionalization or reshoring trend is real. Customers are continually asking them where they can move their manufacturing to, and it does tend to have a friend or ally element in there. Dale, you're absolutely right about that. So I would say there's more of that to come. And to Jeff's point that it's taken several years to get to where we are now, that's because the demand was there a few years ago, starting with the trade war and then the pandemic were pointing people to do that. But actually the demand's even higher now. So I would say that trend is going to continue and accelerate.
Yeah. The other element that isn't regionally dependent, it's globally, some of it is regionally, is the issue of natural resources. So I still scratch my head about TSMC's decision to locate their new fab in Phoenix. We just had, and this has been in the works for quite some time, but just had the announcement that, okay, we've reached an agreement between the upper and lower Colorado River Basin that Arizona, Nevada, and California are going to lose 1 trillion gallons of water. So if we thought we had difficulties with adequate water supply before, as the Department of the Interior works to refill Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the energy issues are going to become even more challenging. And so where you locate some of these things, you need to look at the natural resources. And then, just a couple of things that are global. We talk about electric vehicles. Well, one of the quotes coming out from S&P Global was, we simply don't have enough lithium in our world to supply everything that's needed for all the batteries in all these electric vehicles. Or if you want to look at just energy in general, one of the points that I made was, just the energy supply that's out there. What is there? How much more energy do we need? Especially as you go to these data farms and these server farms and the incredible water and energy needs to supply those. And again, with what's going on in the Middle East, I'm old enough, I'm an old guy. I remember the 70s OPEC oil embargo. And, the supply of energy, you can't take as a given anymore.
Yeah, and like you say, it's important where those resources come from. You look at something like lithium and you think about who controls those resources, and then you overlay that with a desire to ally source or friend source, and it gets a little bit challenging.
But concurrent with all that is the increased need, the trend of sustainability and the importance of that and what's going on in the market as we've been reshoring, and all the industries are being, so I'd like to ask Jeff, what's the impact of that whole trend on your business? And you must be having to respond to it more today than ever before.
Oh, it's chief among the most talked about subjects. And so we're at TTI, we're embracing it. It's clearly, it's more than just the right thing to do, but it is the direction. I think the piece that probably is going to overlap and maybe bring some of these topics back together is in the certainly from on the social side of it, or the S. And so, the work days are being bantered around, everything from 312s to any other kind of combination. I think that's when you might bring back in some of the labor strikes. I think access to personnel, to Philip's point, the only thing that's more on allocation than our time is probably going to be the access to personnel. And so your approach to personnel, your approach to building teams, your ability to properly staff and maintain, I think, from trying to find a very specific point inside ESG to where it ties to our business, I believe that that's going to be, an area that we all have to get better at, better understand, and utilize. In the companies that create that path will have access to the most valuable resource, which is the human resource, and be able to continue to maintain their pace in the overall market. And the ones that don't are going to have even further challenges.
Dale, any comments on sustainability and what you're seeing?
Well, sustainability, we are providing, should we say, as an ECIA, as an industry organization out of the ESG, our focus is on the sustainability issues and how the industry can work together to address that across the industry. So there's many areas where you can look at it. Jeff was talking about human resources. How do we let people, with remote working, with different shifts, so that we might cut down on how much travel has to be done for the work that we're doing. And so usage of video conferencing tools, things like we're doing now. So, but within our industry, there are definitely opportunities for addressing the sustainability issue. And, we might not, people want to take and start, as they do ESG measurements, some people talk about wanting to look at the carbon footprint down to the component level. Most of the executives I talk to don't see that as being a feasible level to go to. But nevertheless, we are going to be looking at the carbon footprint at some level or other in terms of where we go with our electronics. And so that's going to play a big role in designs, a big role in what we do in terms of meeting those designs. So in the ESG world, the S is probably the greatest emphasis that we're taking as an association.
Yeah, we have customers today that are using the carbon content as a part of the total cost of ownership. So when you're bidding, component against component, they're actually integrating the different levels of carbon one supplier's component versus another in their overall valuation during the quotation process, because it's a burden that's going to be transitioned to them or transferred to them, and they're taking that into consideration as a total cost of ownership.
That's interesting. Yeah, and that's encouraging. The only comment I would add to that is that, when we look at the requirement for sustainability and we overlay the regionalization trend, one would hope that shorter supply chains are more sustainable supply chains in the long run, because we're cutting out some of the movement of goods, which should at least have some kind of positive contribution. But when you look at the demand for water and energy, that's a big concern in that sustainability equation.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the intriguing solutions I saw at the Consumer Electronics Show, they were hyping, was Hyundai. Now, Hyundai is also involved, they're involved across the board, including, major shipping solutions. And they were demonstrating an advanced shipping solution that runs on wind power. And, we're going back to the 1800s.
Is it called a yacht or a clipper?
Yeah, it's a solution they have for shipping products across the ocean, and it's wind power driven.
That makes sense. They should use solar as well. They've got a lot of surface area there, and they're out in the sun quite a bit. So yeah, I think e-mobility on water is an interesting factor.
Yeah.
You guys haven't cheered me up today, by the way. I was hoping you guys were going to say, you know what, it's all going to be fine.
Well,
don't worry, Phil. The supply chain is just going to even out, and everything will be okay.
No. Now, listen, I want to be respectful of your time. We're about to hit the top of the hour here, so I do want to, kind of wrap this. Although Jeff did say at the beginning he had a couple jokes he was going to keep just in case we needed to fill some time, but we won't do that. I mean, to cheer Phil up maybe, but we'll pass on that. Let's just end with kind of a, like you're saying, if you're looking forward, I mean, there is, like you saying, Dale, we're at the end of kind of a traditional cycle length here. It should be less negative going forward. Is that the positive note that we end on, that things are going to be less negative moving forward?
I always tend to the more optimistic side in how I approach things. And that's why I say I believe that we're setting the stage for growth next year. But at the same time, I have to admit that my fears are increasing with so many of the potentially disruptive forces that are growing in their potency. So I guess that's how I would describe my approach.
Okay.
He gives with one hand and he takes with the other, doesn't he?
Yeah, right. I saw that, right? So, Jeff, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I think that there's improvements in the overall market. We were just highlighting some of the things to still be mindful of. There will be some fluctuations and disruptors. We tried to highlight those. I think overall we're still in a good space. There's certainly upside opportunities for the companies that can pivot the most quickly and shield themselves from those challenges the most effectively. So I'm excited about what 2024 is going to bring. I just don't want to think that you come back, you have one good day, and you think that all the challenges of the last couple of years have resolved themselves.
Yeah, absolutely not.
There you go, Jeff. That cheered me up.
There you go.
All right.
There we go. Success. Well, the good news today was, of course, that the U.S. GDP grew at the highest in the last quarter. What was 4.9%, highest in 2 years, right? So, so there's the good news for us, right? Although fourth quarter they say it'll return to an annualized 1% level. So we had a good run this last quarter. So. Gentlemen, thank you both. Listen, I have a list of questions. I could go on here and I won't, but thank you both for your time, for your insights. This has been a great discussion, and always look forward to talking to you guys. You offer great insight for our audience, so thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.